Right.
Okay, because otherwise they would have just pushed it to the side. But the struggle of the civil rights movement, and I would recommend people who are younger, who may not have a appreciation of that period. I lived through that period. The 45th anniversary of the historical Dr. King's March on Washington with a little over 250,000 people. You can compare that to the Million Man March on Washington, which had almost 8 times that number. But I remember it clearly, the night they were leaving for Washington on August the 27th, 1963.
Yes,
I was a young FOI, and we were told not to go to the march.
Right.
Malcolm gave us instructions, but we were at every bus where the people were loading up in New York so that they would carry a copy of the Muhammad Speaks with them. But the point I'm making is that that march 45 years ago will be the anniversary, 45 years the day that he delivers his speech.
Right.
So what we have to look at is that Barack's presence speaks for the black community. Let him get into the White House. One thing I learned that Minister Farrakhan said that Harry Belafonte told him in a conversation, that Harry Belafonte was and telling him the story of A. Philip Randolph speaking to Franklin Roosevelt, the president. And he told him all of the things that the government should do to relieve the pain and suffering of black people, you know. I mean, you had a segregated army, but they wanted us to fight. You had Jim Crow in the South. We were the last hired, first fired, and we suffered because of the color of our skin and the baggage of slavery. But A. Philip Randolph told the president all these things, and the president turned to him and said, "Go make me do it." In other words, go rally up your people and your forces. Protest, holler, scream, make some noise, and make me do it. Because I got a Senate and a Congress that I got to deal with. And I got to go back to them and say, well, the people want this or want that. So I'm saying that if we help our brother get to the White House, then we can say, Barack, we need you to pay attention to this. One thing is the prison population. I'm in the state of Colorado, and I think about Florence, the Max at Florence. And I think about our brothers who are in that prison. I think about those who, the Cuban Five, who are in this prison unjustly. I think about Dr. York, and I think about Jamil Alameen and Abdul Rahman and others who are in these max prisons suffering. And if we look into most of those cases, we'll find that justice was not done by some of these men. And look at the prisons throughout America. But we're going to put that on Barack's desk. We're going to make him look, there's a new form of slavery going on in America, and it's the criminal justice system. Because how can a society with 300 million people, and they say we're 13 to 14% of the population, how is it that we have an inordinate amount of men and women in prisons in America? Are we born criminals or something? Or is there something wrong with the system that ends up with our young people in prison? So I think that another thing before we move, and I want to spend some time talking about my passion, which is Africa. And we have this map here. But another thing I'd like to say, that I hear this term, Barack Obama is not black enough. And I say, what does that mean? What does that mean? It means, do you want him to have a black platform every time he gets up to talk to America? This is a country of 300 million people. They're from every walks of life, and we're not the majority of the population. So you got to have some balance there. If this man is going to be the president of America, he must be the president of all of the people. The Hispanic, the Native Americans, the white Americans, the black Americans, the Arabs, the Asians, the Muslims, the Jews, the Christians, the Hindus, the Buddhists, and those who have no religious preference, the agnostics and the atheists. He has to be a president of all of America. So if you try to pigeonhole him, he's a black man, but he ain't talking enough about us, then that's your narrow perspective. He is getting ready to assume the strongest political position in the world, President of the United States. So you got to broaden your horizon and your view now. You got to broaden how you look at this if we're going to have a president that's going to answer. So don't get narrow and say he's not black enough. You know, he's blacker than a lot of us. So I think that that's a very narrow position in light of the bigger picture.
Yes, sir. Now I have to ask this question because it kind of just made my antennas go up when Barack's selection for VP was brought up, Joe Biden. Because the first thing that I thought of when they said Joseph Biden was going to be the vice presidential nominee was he's the one who said okay, Barack's the first clean, articulate, African-American viable candidate. What were your thoughts when he announced it was going to be Joe Biden?
I think one of my, first of all, I've always liked Joe Biden because he's not afraid. And he's been on the attack of the Republicans. He's turned them upside down. And I've always appreciated his style.
Right.
But I again thought about how he said that Barack wasn't qualified because of his foreign international experience, okay, in terms of foreign relations and so forth. And he has a depth of experience in that. And I thought that he was not a person who was controlled and his humble background. But I think that the choice, it went through a lot. Many of us thought that Edwards would be the one, but Edwards had some difficulty, okay? So I think that when they said Joe Biden, I had to look at it and say that if you look at the field, to get a governor who nondescript, or get someone who doesn't have the power and the know-how. This man has been in the Senate over 30 years.
35 years.
35 years in the Senate. That's a long time.
Yes,
and he got into the political arena as a young man, 27 years old. So I think that the choice, and if something should happen to Barack, and this is very dangerous times, as we saw in the papers here in Denver this morning, and people like that think in America. America, we do kill politicians, and we have to come to grips with that. When people look at Abraham Lincoln, when they look at Garfield, when they look at John F. Kennedy, and they look at Robert Kennedy, and they look at Martin Luther King and Malcolm's assassination, they kill people in America.
Right.
And when people are ignorant and do not have the broader picture of what's happening in the world, then someone may think that way about Barack Obama. We ask God to protect him. And we know that God has caused this to happen. Spiritual people see it clearly.
Right.
But I think that the vice president has to be one who can step to the plate, and he's got a vice president who can be an attack dog. If the Republican Party had a vice president under Bush who they thought they could run, they would have ran him.
Right.
But they know that Cheney, they couldn't do nothing with him. So the best thing to do is have him to float his resumes for a job after January the 20th, 2009.
Yes, sir. Now you brought up a really interesting point, because a lot of our people, you know, we're so used to them, especially those who come from your generation, of the enemy killing our leaders, that, you know, there's some black people who I'll talk to in the barbershop and they say, I'm not going to vote for him because I'm afraid he might get assassinated. Now, we just had on the news just yesterday 3 persons who were apprehended. They had a so-called plot to assassinate Barack Obama. They said that it wasn't organized, but one of the persons had 2 rifles and bulletproof vests and all sort of things. What do you think of that aspect of this whole?
Well, first of all, when I read the news today here, I did not appreciate them talking about because of the wind direction and what they were talking about, they could never do it. The very thought that they had it on their mind, according to what the press is saying. And you know, in America, we have what is called copycats. Copycat crimes, copycat killings, copycat robberies. We have that in America. And they know that when they highlight this, also it may feed into others who were thinking about it, who may be a little more sophisticated. They tried to show the lack of sophistication in this hit team, and why Barack has gotten a lot of threats, but we haven't heard about them. They don't talk about them, and they don't